everybody, or should I say good evening. So good to see all of you. And I am so delighted to introduce Mary St Onge, the author of this lovely book that I read and enjoyed so much. Unlike her, I didn't spend my childhood on Lake Vermilion, but I did spend it on another lake. And so the stories that she told resonated with me because of all the things that you do as kids on the lake and the people that you meet and whatever. And so I hope that this is a wonderful trip, nostalgic trip for you all in that regard. And then again, as a mother, Mary did a wonderful job talking about a totally normal son of hers who loved his iPad and all the music and all of that, and how she actually survived those years too. They both did. In the end, they both survived. So that's good. I'm going to give you a peek at the ending. But at any rate, I read the book. I love the book, and I'm so glad that you're here. And I think a lot of you have probably purchased it or have read or will be reading it. And I know it'll be a very, very enjoyable experience for you. I know Mary because the two of us have lived for a long time in Des Moines. My daughter-in-law actually worked with Mary, and so we have a connection there. And we're talking about the fun experience of writing a book. And it took both of us about the same amount of time to write. And then it also took us the same amount of time, and before we started to write it, to just jot down notes or do whatever. And I want to tell you that I know that Mary's put a lot of work, thought, and effort into this book, and it shows. You will really, really enjoy, I think, all the talent that you see for a first-time book writer in this wonderful, wonderful book. So I think that's all I have to say about Mary. And I will turn it over to her. Here you go, Mary.
Thank you, Louise. And thank you, Nancy, also for having me at this event. I appreciate everybody coming out, and I'm looking forward to a lively discussion about our memories on the lake. So just to start out, I give you a little background. Our family came up in 1950, and we purchased the cabin of my uncle on Pine Island. And there were 3 of us kids, and my mom, who didn't swim, didn't drive the boat. And when she had to bathe, she had to get into the water, tie herself onto the dock and onto the post, and then just dunk down and then walk out of slippery rocks to leave her bath. So I got a new appreciation from my mother in writing this book. And writing a book is such an interesting journey because you learn so much about yourself. It's really transformational. And you learn so much about your family. I didn't know a lot of things about my family until I really put pen to paper and started writing about it. So there were not many cabins on the east end of Lake Vermilion when we came up, but a lot of people came because they had seen a brochure called The Call of the Wild, and it was a 24-page brochure from some entrepreneurs in Duluth. And these entrepreneurs had plotted out several lakeshore places and roads and golf courses, and none of it was really feasible. But people liked what they saw, and so they traveled down into Iowa and Nebraska and some places in Illinois. And they got some people to come up here, and it was really pioneerish. I mean, everything up here had been logging and mining, and the Chippewa were here, with rice, farming rice and fish and all that stuff, but there wasn't anything that was recreational. But they made it sound like it was this great recreation area and resort area. So anyway, some of the people that came up here settled here. One of the entrepreneurs is Gray. His last name was Gray, and he and his wife settled on the upper dells of Vermilion Dells, and they had this tiny little cabin, and they were there for several years, and then they divorced, and she got the cabin and then 5 lots. And so years later, when her daughter was older, she would come up with her. And her daughter told me stories because she eventually married my uncle. Lots of that going on, and Lake Vermilion and on Pine Island. But when they got together, she said when she was a young girl that she would sneak off the island at night, pile her hair on top of her head, and swim over to Isle of Pines, to the Idlewild Resort on Saturday night. So her mother never knew. Mother was probably already sleeping, and then she'd swim back, after midnight. And so, yeah, there was a lot of those fun things going on. So I thought I would just read a little bit of the book, and then we could have a discussion about how maybe some of you have memories that are similar, or anything that you want to ask about the process. So I want to talk about when our family came up and how we got here and what we did when we first got here and the years of learning all the things about being in the wild. Each year on the day after school ended, my family would load up the car for our annual trek to the lake. Our 1955 Buick sedan looked like the Jodes pickup truck from the Grapes of Wrath, piled with immense loads of supplies for the summer. Bags of sweatshirts, bathing suits, games, and books were stuffed around the cases of old Milwaukee beer that dominated the trunk space. Since sales tax were higher in Minnesota than across the bridge in South Sioux City, Nebraska, my parents insisted on lugging their beer stash across the state line in the vain hope that their stay would not outlast their supply. The night before our summer migration, none of us got much sleep. We dreaded the 12-hour drive, but wildly anticipated our final destination, our cabin on an island by the lake, the place we dreamed about during the long gray Iowa winters. At 4 a.m., my mother gently shook me and said, "Come on, sweetie, time to go." I rubbed the sleep out of my eyes and saw her standing over the bed, her coal black hair pulled into a ponytail, her compact body dressed in lake garb of white pedal pushers and a navy-colored boat neck shirt. I wanted her to carry me to the car in my cotton jammies, but I saw the shorts and shirt laid out in the front of the bed, so I sleepily removed my pajamas, stuck them under the pillow, and put on my clothes. My 6-year-old body felt the nausea of interrupted sleep as I walked to the car, hoping to continue my dreams at least until sunrise. My brothers arose without complaint. This was the day they'd been waiting for all winter, the day they had circled and counted down on their X-marked calendar. Beginning on the day we returned home to begin the new school year, I heard them in their room studying the map of the lake, charting out the best fishing holes, arguing about who caught the largest walleye, and checking off the days on their calendar until they could return. They threw on their traveling clothes of jeans and white t-shirts and stumbled to the car in the dark. As we drove out of Sioux City on the 2-lane highway, my father at the wheel, mother next to him as co-pilot, and my brothers in the back seat, I laid rolled up like a log in the back window, watching the miles of cornfields, telephone poles, and wires whiz by. Burma shave signs, which my brothers always read aloud, occasionally punctuated the scenery. Hardly a driver is now alive who passed on hills at 75. Don't stick your elbow out so far, it might go home in another car. He played the sax, had no BO, but his whiskers scratched, so she let him go. My brother complained, "Dad, I'm hungry. When are we going to stop for breakfast?" Soon, he replied, although we all knew it would be miles before he was willing to stop. Like a horse smelling the barn, our final destination was his only goal. "Do you guys have to smoke?" Gary asked. "I think I'm going to puke." And so it went for 500 miles, but in the last 50 miles, the landscape and the atmosphere changed. Fields gave way to groves of evergreens and birch. The smell of damp earth and pine permeated the air as we rolled down our windows to breathe in its familiarity. When we left the last big town of Virginia, we crossed the Laurentian Divide, past which all waters flow north to the Hudson instead of south to the Gulf of Mexico. The rocky shores of the glacial lakes that make up the Boundary Water Canoe area differ from the lakes in the middle of the state. They have more cliffs and outcroppings than sand and seaweed. Heading north, we silently greeted the familiar signposts of our summer community. The little white clapboard church, its bell tower peeking through the pines, the Black Bear Cafe with the carved wooden bear out front, and the Y store signifying the fork in the road where we turned onto a gravel road leading us to Grubens Marina. A few yards from that turnoff is the Pike River flowage, or as we called it, Root Beer Falls, named for the reddish-brown hues that the tints of the iron waters left. We always gauged the flow of the falls as a harbinger of how high the lake water would be when we arrived. Traveling these last few miles, I felt a stir of excitement that grips me to this day. Our anticipation built with the aromatic scent of pine as we entered Arrowhead Point. Passing the West Haven Lodge sign, silence overtook us as each of us entered our own fantasies of the summer to come. Our excitement and the pure joy of summer fun lay before us at the first sight of the wooden bridge to Isle of Pines as we pulled from Grubens Marina. As the car wheels ground to a halt on the gravel road in the marina, my dad exclaimed, "All right, we're here, boys, start unloading the car. I'm going to stop in the store and ask Bill to take us across." In 1886, the Gruben family, headed by Ole Gruben, immigrated to from Norway to Minnesota, and they bought a farm in Pike Bay and Lake Vermilion. They homesteaded the land, and Theodore Roosevelt signed the title over to them. Ole and his wife Elsie had 9 children, 2 of whom, Bill and George, became part of our Pine Island history. Bill and George did some logging in the 1920s, harvesting large white and red pines from Pine Island, but their primary business at the time was Gruben Brothers Boat Livery, located by Tower. Customers usually came by train, and the brothers would ferry these summer visitors across to various places on the lake. This business continued until they purchased Arrowhead Point, which is Grubens Marina, and the Isle of Pines, complete with the Idlewild Resort. They moved several of the buildings from the livery business to their new location, including one of the 10 garages, and 8 teams of horses moved the summer grocery store, originally part of a school on the Indian Reservation, over on the ice in 1933. In 1936, a 1-lane bridge was built to connect Arrowhead Point with the 33-acre Isle of Pines. In the winter of that year, a lot of men needed work, so pine and cedar logs cut from trees on the island were used to form the cribs. So back to Grubens, my dad climbed the cement steps, entered the screened-in porch of the marina's clapboard general store. Steel coolers kept cool by ice blocks, one full of ice cream sandwiches and fudgesicles, and another one filled with pop and beer, sat along the wall by the entrance to the store. An old wooden swing made of cedar logs attached to the ceiling with rusted chains hung on the far end of the porch. A cribbage board sat on an old table with 2 chairs awaiting players to while away the afternoon. Old John, the Marine's handyman, stood by the entrance, his lined, expressionless Norwegian face looking like a carved wooden Indian at a cigar shop. My dad always said you could smell old John before you saw him. "Hello, Whitey," greeted John. "How long are you up for?" "About 2 weeks. Katie and the kids will be here all summer, and I'll be back in August." "Say, can you deliver some ice and some minnows? How's the fishing? They catching any?" "Not bad. Should be good until the mayflies hit in a couple weeks." With this news, my dad entered the store to arrange for our transportation across the lake. Bill and Harriet Gruben, a portly couple who looked like they could be brother and sister, sat behind the counter near the cash register. The store had only 5 shelves, stocked with bread, canned goods, peanut butter, paper products, lures and bobbers, boxes of Baby Ruth, salted nut rolls, malted milk bowls, jawbreakers, bazooka gum, and lemon drops were stored in a case so the summer kids wouldn't steal candy while they weren't looking. Bill and Harriet lived above the store with their only child, William, who everyone called Butchie. "How was your winter, Bill?" my father asked. "Oh, can't complain," replied Bill. That was his favorite expression and contradicted nearly everything else he said. "It's 90 in the shade," he'd exclaim on every Sunday day. "Awful rough out there," he'd say at the first hint of a breeze. All the locals seemed to talk that way, as though they used up their words over the winter. "Damn rain," he'd say when the skies opened up, and of course I can't forget his catch-all phrase, "Ain't it awful?" "Looks like a calm day to cross. Should we get going?" asked Dad. "The boys will load up the boat." The Vermilion Dells on Pine Island, where we were headed, is boat access only, so we carried our bags and cases of beer to the old tin boathouse down by the water. It housed 4 boat slips. The boathouse was dark inside and smelled of mildew. Sparrows flew overhead, perching on the rafters. I found it scary. We loaded our stuff into Bill's enormous steel craft, which was about 26 feet long, painted white, green, and some kind of shade of peach. It was a huge old tub, like a sports boat on helium. Bill started up the motor and slowly pulled out of the boathouse. The smell of marine gas wafted through the air as we chugged our way over to the island. The water was calm, I'm sure as a result of my mother's prayers. Only one more trip across the lake for her this year, and that wouldn't be until Labor Day when we'd leave. As we entered Big Bay and rounded the point of Pine Island, my brothers hooted and hollered, and I joined in. Bill slowed the engine as he prepared for his landing at our old crib dock. For someone who had been on the lake his entire life, he was not a particularly skilled boat driver. He could never seem to make a smooth landing. It was just straight away with the boat's bow crashing into either the side or the front of the dock. As he made his approach, we all secretly braced ourselves for a grooving one-point landing. Once at the dock, my father held onto the post while the boys unloaded our gear. "Thanks for the ride, Bill. Just put it on my account," yelled my father over the roar of the Steelcraft's motor. "You boys bring in the bags. I'll go up." As the boys carried our stuff to the cabin, Dad came running back out of the cabin yelling, "Boys, go see what's in there. It's an awful mess." "Great," Gary said. "Come on, John. The great white hunter calls." "Geez, what's that smell?" John asked, holding his nose and looking around the cabin. Bird poop and feathers were everywhere, and broken lamps and kitchen crockery, too. They removed the poop-encrusted sheets covering the furniture and threw them off at the front stoop in the yard. Mom and Dad threw open the windows to get the stench out, and Gary found a dead wood duck in the bedroom, and lifting it by his wing, carried it down to the dock and hurled it into the lake. "Now, how did that get in here?" my mom said. It would be days until Dad figured out that he had forgotten to put the screen cover over the chimney before leaving the previous year. Just one of his yearly lessons about life in the wild. Tired from the journey and the scrubbing of floors and water and dishes, we all fell asleep on unmade cots in the screened-in porch as sundown and the lapping waves provided our lullaby. So that's how it usually went when we came home in the early days. We didn't get electricity till 76. Yeah. And we didn't have, of course, electric lifts or anything like that. So my dad, every night, we had a 17-foot wooden Shell Lake fishing boat, and we'd have to pull it up. We face the south of toward Big Bay, so we get a lot of wind action if it's from the south. And so he had made this ramp out of 2x4s, and every evening we'd have to pull the boat out of the water so it wouldn't get swamped if there was any wave action. And so my mother would go in and get the bacon grease from breakfast, put it on all the slats of the ramp, and then he'd pull it up. So it was crazy when I think of that, and you know how they lived so frugally and how they had so much work to do when they were here just for, feeding us. And, yeah, it was really crazy. So, but crazy good. So we just had the run of the island, and there were other kids that came up later, and two of them are here. And it was just a lot of fun, and it was so different from what my son experiences now, because now they have the iPads and the iPods and everything, and they're not just out there running up and down the path, just having fun with each other. There were times when the teenagers would get together and the parents didn't even know where they were, but there was no phone, there was no way of communicating. So one night they were over on Comet Island and there was a huge storm. And they thought, well, maybe if we just take an inner tube and go across the lake, it would just take us there, right? And then they thought better of that. So, they're gone all night and the parents don't know where they are. And then in the morning, they had been sleeping in the boathouse over there. In the morning, they just got up, bailed out their boats and went back across. And, they go over to the upper dells of Vermilion Dells, and all the mothers are sitting there with their rosary beads. And so not much communication either. one more story, because he's here. I want to tell your story, Jim. The only way that we got any communication off island was the mailboat. And I believe that here there are only, I think in the United States there's only 3 mailboats left, like Geneva, here, and someplace out either New Hampshire or upstate New York. That's all that's left, and it's been around for 100 years. But Jim Birmingham, my neighbor and brother, really, was up here, and he was kind of, the bon vivant. He was, with all the girls, they thought, oh, Jim's so cute. And so Connie, his high school sweetheart, was home, and she was contemplating going in the convent. And so she wrote him a letter and said, I think I'm going to go in the convent. And of course, that was pretty disturbing to Jim, so he said to his sister, would you mind if we go to Mass in Virginia on Saturday instead of on Sunday morning in Tower? She goes, okay, sure. So they drive to Virginia, and he takes them right to the bus station. And she's going, wait a minute, what is this? And he said, well, here's the letter that I got that Connie said she's going to go in the convent, and I got to go home and convince her not to do it. And I needed an accomplice to take the car back. So he got to Sioux City. I think he took the bus to Minneapolis and maybe hitchhiked the rest of the way. We could do that then. Was that right? Anyway, they got married and lived happily ever after, and they have this fabulous family. And I asked him, after they've been married for 60 years, I said, well, Jim, how did you know that she was the one? He goes, well, hell, she gave up God for me. So yeah. So, does anybody have any questions or want to offer any of your memories and of how you got here? Anybody else? Yeah, go ahead.
Well,
Louise.
Just the whole Idlewild thing. We were sitting in the depot a couple days ago, and we were talking about things, the old days and whatever, and the name Idlewild came up, and I said, what's with the Idlewild? We don't, and this is somebody that's been on the lake for a while, and of course, Nancy and I had done some research on Isle of Pine, so I said, oh, I know all about it. It was over on Isle of Pine, blah, 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 It was, and I guess what I wanted to say is that there was a lot going on, and I really liked how you, in your book, you would talk about a story about your family, but then you also you had done some research about this or that or whatever, and so we got a little history as well as the story. There was a lot of things interwoven in your book that it was educational in a lot of ways because we learned some things. It was a great narrative because you told about things that we remember, especially the people that I'm seeing in this car from our childhood, because we're a lot of us in the same age. And even if we didn't have a car trip to Lake Vermilion for 12 hours, I remember the 12 hours my family would drive, to another vacation, and it was with the dog. We had dogs. It was terrible, and stuff on top of the car.
Yeah.
And and the beer cases in our car were in front of the passenger seat, so that we could have an extra bed there, and then we have them all spread all over the back of the station wagon. Of course, there weren't any car seats. But at any rate, so that, and then also the poignant, memories of you and John, your son.
Yeah.
That was really nice too.
Yeah.
But it just sounds like you guys had so much fun. And one of the things too that I thought, you just mentioned it again, no TV, no iPad, no this or that. And at our cabin, until not that long ago, we didn't even have a TV set because we didn't get TV, we couldn't, and if you knew my husband, he wasn't about to start ordering it, but then of course we overruled him finally about 10 years ago, so.
Yeah.
But, you just read a book, or you take a nap, or you take a hike, or you go swimming, or whatever. You don't do all the other, you just have fun with each other.
Right.
So, anyways, those are
Yeah.
my comments about it.
Yeah, thanks, Louise.
I found it very interesting to see the life of people who were summer people on Lake Vermilion. I grew up in town, and so I wasn't always aware of what went on with the kids or the people who came up only for the summer,
Yeah.
where they lived and what they did. And I remember I taught at a community college in Virginia, and when we got new people to the area that came from many different states and probably more populated areas, they would say, I can't believe the people in this area. They live in town and then they all have a cabin only 2 miles away or 3 miles away. I don't understand it, but there was something magical about living on the lake, and that's why.
No kidding. No kidding. Thank you for sharing that. Yeah.
You talked about Butch Rubin. What was
Yes.
your relationship with Butch Rubin? He was my husband's, one of his best friends.
Oh my goodness. Yeah, Butch, he would run with us sometimes because he was probably 2 years older than I. And he was always just the sweetest guy. And I remember hearing, on Labor Day, my brother John, or Finn in the book, went over to Grubin's on that day, and he came back and he was so shook up. He goes, Butchie was killed last night in a car accident. And yeah, and it shocked all of us because all of us on the island knew him. Grubin's was our jumping off point. We knew all the Grubins pretty well, and he was a sweetheart. And I think his dad, Bill, died like 3 years later. Yeah, I mean, that's a hard one to take, right?
So did you play basketball with him?
I didn't, but I know some of the guys did, yeah.
Yeah, that
Yeah.
was a good gathering place, was the basketball hoop.
Yeah. And then, Dick Grubin took over after Bill and Harriet, and he called us on the island sack packers because we had to take everything over in sacks and bags, and and it kind of like we weren't from these parts, and this is what he thought. So that was kind of funny. So now we would have an annual path party called the Pine Island Sack Packers Society, and if you think about the acronym. So we did that for years, and then it just there were too many people on somebody's lawn, So, but it used to be people from, newborns to in their 80s at these path parties. And it was a great thing that we look forward to every year. Yeah. I think you, Joan, yeah, you had it.
My father-in-law, Mike Halstead Sr., came up here in the early 30s or late 20s. He bought 350 feet at Birch Point, across from Grubin's Marina, Isle of Pines, and then Grubin's we can see, and the old bridge. And he got it sight unseen, tax forfeited, and he could have bought from there to the point, end of the point, for $1,000 in 1930. And he was a lawyer, so he had the money, but he said, I don't need it.
Wow.
But the key is, as Mary indicates here, is that he would go over to Grubin's, and he knew all these names and all these stories. He would go over to Grubin's with some other people from Duluth. We're from Duluth, and I can't remember their last name now, who have an island up north where George Gutman has his on the other side, north end of Pine. And he would snowshoe from Grubin's, and maybe it was even later, because they used to have a place where they had meat and other kinds of things as they grew older. And so he would snowshoe, he would fill up a pack with his 1 or 2 friends, and then snowshoe from Grubin's across, as I was telling George, Canfield Port, all the way down to Canfield Portage. They'd snowshoe with their backpacks on and their food, and then cross at Canfield, and then go all the way up to, I can't remember their name, at the very end, north end of Pine Island. There's an island there that has vertical log cabins like we do.
Hoff? Was it Hoff Island?
Pardon?
Hoff?
Yes, Hoff Island.
Oh,
John Hoff and all that. And they were good friends from Duluth. And I think it was just amazing when I stopped to think about how far they went.
Yeah,
You know, 25 miles or
Right.
more even to get up there.
right.
And enjoy the weekend with the others and then come back. But the stories, he could contribute to the book so well.
Yeah,
And
oh, I love hearing
wish
those
he
stories.
had seen it,
Yeah,
but it just very eventful and very, very charming.
that's
And
what it
his-
is.
The cabin he built was, do you know the name Micheletti? Yeah, he built a lot of cabins and different things around Birch Point anyway. And so he did the vertical log cabins, and it was built in 1948. And it's still in pieces.
That's great.
And I'm
Thank
doing all those things you're talking about doing.
you. Right.
It's here, I'm on bottled water. I just have pest control in my cabin. And I'm trying to deal with the water system, so
Yeah.
anyway.
Yeah. Thanks.
But you do learn so fast, because you have to.
You have to. You have to learn how to put it all together. I was thinking when you were talking about Hoff Island and, you know, going all over the lake, I remember when I was really a young girl that some people from the reservation in their birch bark canoe would come by, and they'd never say anything. They'd just take their paddle and pound it on the dock, and they were selling blueberries. And so my dad would give me a quarter, and I'd go down and get the blueberries, and they did this for a number of years. So that was a wordless transaction.
You know, along those lines, where I have more than one cabin on our property, but one dates back to the 1930s. And so people say, oh, you know, what about these cabins? And I say, you know, when the people that my husband bought, two people before my husband, it was just that one 1930s cabin, and I say, and the guy that lived in it was a trapper. A trapper, and that's how he made his living, trapping fur, you know, and then they built more modern cabins on the property because that one it's still going, but you know, the others are more comfortable. But I mean, those were the days, you know, the Native Americans and the canoes and you know, snowshoeing and all of that. That was a long time ago. That's 100 years ago almost.
Exactly.
Wow.
Yeah. My cabin is 100 years this year.
Is it?
Yeah, so we just had a little celebration of that. But I think, did you want to say something?
I'm pretty sure that the fellow you referred to as John that sat on the porch, he was John Voss, and he lived across the road from us for many, many years.
Yes.
And
you are on.
I'm on Isle Pine.
Okay, yes.
And John, it was Harriet's house that she eventually, you know, they split the lots up and all the girls got a lot.
Yeah.
And well, they were related to the Grubens through marriage. They all got lots too.
Yeah.
But Harriet made a little like apartment at the end of her garage, and John Voss lived there for years. And toward the end, I met him. He wore bedroom slippers all the time. He said his feet hurt. I don't know if he had corns or what, but he would walk. It looked like he was going to tip over because he was real round on the bottom of his feet. And he was quite elderly when I met him.
Yeah.
And he only would eat. He would have the neighbors go to the store for him, and he ate sardines. He'd get the ones in the can and Captain Crunch. That's pretty much all he ate for years, because I went to the store for him a couple times, my next door neighbors went to the store for him a couple of times. And he would, if he saw any of my kids, they were pretty small then, and they'd be out, you know, on the road or something, and he'd give them the finger and call them the F word.
Yes, that's John.
That was John. He didn't want those kids to bother him, you could tell, and the kids thought he was great. So
They
they
did.
bothered him just terrible.
Oh,
So
God.
he was quite the character, and eventually Lee Peterson had the cabin next to him, and eventually they had to kind of watch out for him, because they were right next door, and they would see him, and he would go and he'd run out of gas for a snowmobile, and he'd go around to people's houses that weren't around and see if they left the gas can out, you know, and he'd take a little bit here, a little bit there, and so he could get himself to the Y store to buy something. Snuff, he liked his snuff too.
Yes, he did.
And so he was really an icon on the lake.
He was.
When he didn't work for Grubens anymore, for Bill, he started going to many cabins, mostly on Pine Island, and put in their water systems and make sure that their propane was full and, you know, all that kind of stuff. And he opened a lot of cabins for people for many, many years.
Yeah.
Borrowing other people's gas to get there.
That sounds about right. Wait,
He was really a funny guy. And
when you were
he'd
talking,
sit right under the bridge and fish.
yeah.
And if you needed to get under the bridge, like to go get gas at Rubens or something, and you went under the bridge, oh, he'd cuss you out for 10 minutes because you went past him while he had a line in the water.
Oh,
So
those
I'm
are
sure that's
great
who
stories.
your John was.
That's John Voss. In fact, you prompted a memory that I had forgotten about. When we would go over to Grubens to get candy and stuff, and he'd be standing at the door there, and he'd look over and he'd go, Hughes.
Yep. That was John. He loved giving the finger to people.
And he had these enormous hands.
Yes, he was tall, and when I knew him, he was really thin. He was
Yeah.
tall and skinny,
Yeah.
and very ancient looking.
Yes, he looked like,
He always looked ancient.
yes, almost ageless, but ancient, yeah. He used to come by along the Vermilion Dells to get cans, because we didn't have garbage service or anything. We're on an island, and people were happy to save their cans for him because it helped supplement his income. And so one time when my husband, first trip up here, meeting my parents, being on the island, he wasn't used to being, on a lake. My dad decided, well, I got to get to know this guy, so I think I'll take him out fishing, being my husband. And so they go out fishing, and I see John Voss come around the point, going slow and going to all the docks to pick up cans. And our neighbor was taking her son out water skiing, and she didn't see him. So he was coming around, she was water skiing, or she was driving the boat, and her son was water skiing, and she ran right into his boat. And it was just like, so the boat just started spinning, and it knocked him out. It didn't throw him out of the boat, but it just knocked him unconscious. And it's spinning around, and my dad, says, okay, well, we got to do something here. And so he gets close to the boat, and he says to my husband, now when I get close, you just jump in and turn off the motor. And he goes, I don't think that's a good idea. So he didn't do it. So finally, and he was afraid to sidle up too close because if he hit it hard, it could throw him out, of the boat. Anyway, so they finally sidled up to him, and he was just coming out of his, whatever it was that he had passed out. So my husband and my dad tied his boat onto our boat and took him over and took him to the hospital in Virginia and all that stuff. And so he wanted to sue the driver of the boat, of course. And instead, the driver of the boat's father bought him a new boat. So, yeah.
Well, most of the time
crazy.
he borrowed other people's boats. He would go, mostly Grubens, because Rubens had boats there for rent, and he'd just go over and grab them. I don't remember him owning his own boat, and he did own his own snowmobile though. That he did own.
Yeah.
But yeah,
Colorful characters.
he was, yeah. And he ended up getting, one time, I was not here when this happened, but he would go up Arrowhead Point Road and he would take his snowmobile, even when there was just dirt, to get to the Y store. That's how he got around. And, or go on the grass, you know. And for some reason, when he came back, he got a little confused about where to turn, and he was crosswise across the road where you turn down to Arrowhead Point and where 77 meet. And a judge came by and almost hit him because he was in the middle of the road, so just sitting there like wondering where he should turn. And so they took away his snowmobile. The sheriff had to come, and so he lost his snow. So then he borrowed other people's snowmobiles. He was quite the guy.
I've got a couple of things, Mary.
Yeah.
One is, first of all, I'm from Virginia originally, and kind of piggybacking on your story, even if you didn't have a cabin on Lake Vermilion, and it sounds like you did.
I didn't, but I certainly enjoyed my friends' cabins.
Exactly. And we had a cabin on a different lake, but when we didn't have a cabin, my dad worked at the Oliver in Virginia on the north side in the truck garage. And my parents liked to fish so much that on a weeknight, she would pack a supper. The whistle blew back in those days. The whistle would blow at 4:30. Okay, we're going fishing on Lake Vermilion tonight. So we put the picnic basket in the car, get the boat, go to Moccasin Point, we'd fish, we'd eat our supper in the boat, and we'd go back home. So even those of us who didn't have cabins here, thank goodness we live here now in Idle Pines, but it was even meaningful for people who didn't live here. But the other story is about, I think a Pine Island story. Back when they had the hamburger joint at Moccasin Point, we went there with another couple. And we watched people coming in, taking their boats out on Moccasin Point, and it was very entertaining. We started ranking them like the Olympics. 5.5, 9.9, 2.1. And the low ones were typically the men who yelled at their wives because they weren't doing it right. The high ones we think were Pine Island people. They would come in, and a lot of times it was families. And they would have all these sacks and containers, and it was like clockwork. Everybody had a job, everybody knew what they had to do.
Right.
They got it out, they were very efficient. 9.9, 10, we'd say Pine Island people.
Oh, that's great. Thanks for telling that. That's good.
I have a Rubens story. My husband bought in 1968, and there weren't, and it's so fun because if you talk to some of the people that have been here forever, and you ask them what their phone number is if they still have a home phone in their cabins, they'll just give you the last 4 digits. Remember that? Yeah, you know that? And so, and he did not want to get a phone in the cabin, even though Rubens had a phone. And he had his, but then he finally did, after a couple of years, he got a phone. But he would be coming, he'd be spending like a week or a couple of weeks or whatever in the cabin with his kids and his late wife, and he told his office, because at first they didn't have a phone, that the cabin didn't have a phone, and you couldn't even get telephone wires to the cabin. So if you needed to get a hold of them, you'd have to call Rubens, and then Rubens would tell them, and at first they did that, keep them down into any phone calls, and then they do it. But then after a while, they got a phone in the cabin, but he never told the office that. For about 6 years. And he had really nice vacations for a whole lot of time because of that.
That's great.
The other thing that I don't know if you're aware of, but this is according to Jeff's grandpa, who bought a cabin in about 1952 on Birch Point. And there's all those lots that are very 50 feet, in a row.
Right.
And when the people that were trying to promote the area, you talked about the brochure and all that stuff, they hired realtors in the different towns. So all the people from Iowa were all on one side of Pine Island. Then you had the people from Illinois. Then you had the Texas people. Then you had the people from Evelyn and Virginia. And they were all, they gave them so many lots to sell, and they were all together. So that's all changed now because they're buying and selling. But at one time, you knew if you went right across and went down 2 or 3 cabins, everybody was from Iowa.
Yeah, usually Des Moines.
Yeah.
Yep. Yeah, that's interesting. We used to always think, that side of the island, which is across from Milo Pines, is doctors and lawyers and Indian chiefs, and although they were all fairly wealthy, the places were bigger than on our side, which faces Comet Island. And the mayor of Des Moines had a place on that side of the island, the nice side. And one day, my friend Mike Hughes was down on his dock, and he had a high school friend, just build a cabin next to our cabin, which was on the other side. And so Mrs. Denny, who was, she kind of would put her lipstick on like Lucille Ball, and she was all coiffed up, and she was pretty impressed with her station in life and stuff. And so she walks up to them, and they're on the dock talking, and he said, "Oh, hi, Mrs. Denny, I'd like you to meet the newest person on the Dells." And she said, "Oh, Jim, where is your cabin?" And he said, "Right next to Katie and Whitey Rosenberger's." And she goes, "Oh, the lower Dells." So that's how it was. You're right. It was like, we had school teachers and cattlemen and public servants on our side, and then it was all like, retail owners and doctors and lawyers on the other side. So there was something to it. And sheriffs, yeah.
That was another pastime in Virginia. Those that have come up here a long time, Highway 53 used to go right through Virginia. Remember, you used to go down Main Street, flying through town.
Yeah.
Well, that went kind of by my house up by the golf course. One of our big activities was going out to count license plates.
Iowa, yeah.
Illinois. That was a big pastime.
Yeah.
All going to Lake Vermilion.
No kidding.
Or Capitola, as people,
Oh, wow. I don't know how we are on time here.
My husband had bought a cabin on Birch Point that was part of the Birch Point Resort.
The which resort?
Birch Point?
Yeah.
Yeah. And when they were selling off the cabins, the guy that was selling off the cabins, Scubik, he didn't want to give them all to sell them to one person. So my husband got the last cabin.
Oh,
He's had
great.
that since 1988.
Great.
The first time he brought me up here, I thought he was taking me deep into the woods. Because
For
we
sure.
landed for our honeymoon, we've only been married 10 years. We land in Duluth, and the further away from Duluth we are, the more country there is, and
Yeah.
less civilization.
Yeah.
We go through Virginia, I go, oh, right, a city.
Yeah, really. The
And
big city.
then we head out 169, I'm going, well, now where are we going? And then we get off at the Y store and head down 77. I go, oh, it's getting more isolated now. And then we turn off of that onto Birch Point, and that's really isolated.
Yeah.
And I'm thinking what my granddaughter says, he's going to take you up there and get rid of you. And then to get to our cabin, you do an S curve. And there's the lake.
And you were
That's all it
sold.
took.
That's all it took. Can I
The best
end?
part is our neighbor Bernie,
Yeah?
he has postcards from AAA when they were advertising it.
Oh,
And he got me a
wow.
copy, and I got it on display.
Oh,
Because he came up as a kid, because they're from the Twin Cities,
yeah.
and this was their summer vacation.
Wow.
Yeah, so he's got stories.
Everybody here has stories, and I enjoyed hearing them so much. Thank you for sharing. And on one thing, can I just say this is what I've learned in all the years of being here? So the end of the book, the last page, in fact, can you hold that for me?
Sure.
But so I can read it. I wrote it, but so at the end of the book is a page about the life lessons of the lake. And here's what I've learned. Go jump in the lake. Cold water cures everything. Always greet guests at the dock. It's courteous, welcoming, and helpful in navigating rough waters. Be good stewards of the lake and the woods. Nature is not for us, it is a part of us. Don't be afraid if you lose your way. You know where the sun rises. Explore the unknown. Remember, you're never alone. There is a web that binds us together. Help yourself by helping your neighbors. Service is the work of the soul. Remember all the people that brought you here. Gratitude reminds you of what truly matters in life. See the goodness in those who walk this path with you, even when they disappoint you. Forgiveness is the portal to peace. When you're feeling self-involved, go out at night, lie down on the dock, and look up at the stars. Perspective is everything. And now is all there is, and it's later than you think. Be present.
Well, we thank you, Mary, for coming, and for those of you who haven't already bought a book, they are available for $15 each, and Mary will sign them for you. And we look forward to the sequel. They always said to me, "You're going to write a sequel." I said, no, but maybe you will. And if you do, I know it'll be great. Thanks for coming.
Thank you, Louise. Thank you, Nancy. Thank you, Tamara.